Long Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be stepping in on behalf of my colleagues today, and indeed to be opposite the right honourable gentleman. And might I echo his comments made regarding the marking of the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landing, which are being commemorated today in Portsmouth. We must never forget the extraordinary sacrifices of all those who landed that day in Normandy, and the achievements of our servicemen and women who came together to fight fascism and protect our freedom. I'd also like to wish an Eid al-Fitr to all of our Muslim friends right across the United Kingdom, and I also want to express solidarity to all women fighting pension injustice in court and outside Parliament today. I'd also like to congratulate both English teams who competed in the Champions League final on Saturday. And as a Man United fan, it pains me to congratulate Liverpool on their victory. Although fair play, fans did rename Margaret Thatcher Square in Madrid Jeremy Corbyn Square. And I reckon that deserves brownie points even from a Man United fan. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister had to repeat to President Trump a journalist's question about whether the NHS is on the table as part of a US trade deal. Given the Prime Minister was silent on the matter, perhaps the right honourable gentleman could clarify the government's position. Will the Tory party give US companies access to the NHS, yes or no?
Well, can I first of all welcome the Honourable Lady to these new responsibilities for her, and to agree with the comments she made both about D-Day and about the success of English football teams in the recent 2 European Championships, and also to wish well to both the English and Scottish women's 11 for their forthcoming matches. I welcome the Honourable Lady. I feel slightly sorry for the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Islington South, who I'm used to jousting with, who seems to have been dispatched to internal exile somewhere else along the front bench. And you know, it's perhaps it's just the Honourable Lady perhaps needs to watch out, because I think there's a lesson there that anybody who at the dispatch box outshines the dear leader risks being airbrushed out of the Politburo history at the earliest opportunity. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has been very clear, and she spoke for everyone in the government and on this side of the House. When it comes to trade negotiations, the NHS is not and will not be up for sale.
He's full of the banter today, Mr. Speaker. Well, the President certainly seemed to think the NHS was on the table yesterday. So does the Trade Secretary. But who knows who speaks for the government at the moment? And the Prime Minister did nothing to allay concerns yesterday. So I hope she was more forceful in raising climate change, with a President who initiated the US withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, opened up record amounts of land for oil and gas drilling, and called climate change a hoax. Can the right honourable gentleman confirm if yesterday the Prime Minister made any attempt to convince him that climate change is in fact real?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. My right friend, the Prime Minister, did raise climate change with the President yesterday, and she made clear at their joint press conference yesterday afternoon that that is what she had done. We are very proud of this country's commitment to the international agreements to reduce global carbon emissions, and we have a better track record in reducing those emissions than any other G7 member state.
Long Bailey.
Speaker, the statistics that the right honourable gentleman referred to relates to emissions cuts since 2010, when the UK benefited from policies put in by the last Labour government, policies which have since been dismantled. But how much authority does this government actually have on this issue? 3 current Cabinet Ministers have denied the scientific consensus on climate change, and several of those standing in the Tory leadership contest have close links with organisations and individuals promoting climate denial. Mr. Speaker, it does not bode well. Figures released in April show that the UK is set to miss its own carbon budgets by an ever-widening margin. Would the right honourable gentleman like to explain why the government is off track to meeting its own targets?
Mr. Speaker, we're not off track towards meeting those targets at all. Since 2010, the United Kingdom has decarbonised our economy faster than any other G7. We generate now a record amount of electricity from renewable energy sources, and we have just gone through the longest period in our history without relying on electricity generated from coal. That stands rather starkly against what appears to be the Labour Party's declared policy, which is to reopen the coal mines, but not actually to burn the coal that they mine.
Clear, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party does not condone the reopening of any coal mine to be used for energy purposes. And once again, Mr. Speaker, he refers to climate emissions reductions that were implemented using Labour Party policy. Labour policies that have since been dismantled. And not only is the government failing to meet its targets, but last year actually saw the smallest drop in carbon emissions in the last 6 years, just 2%. At that rate, it would take until the end of the century to reach net zero emissions. And Mr. Speaker, just yesterday, the Financial Times reported that the government is accused of trying to fiddle its emissions figures, ignoring its official advisers. So let me ask the right honourable gentleman a simple policy question. The Labour Party has committed to banning fracking. Will the government ban fracking and allow new onshore wind in England, yes or no?
What the government is committed to is to reducing emissions in line with both our domestic and global targets. And we have not just met, but we have outperformed our first and second carbon budgets, and we are on track towards meeting the third. There is going to be a need for some time into the future to use gas as a transitional fuel, but that is much less polluting than other forms of hydrocarbon-based energy, and it therefore is a good source during the transition period while we make ready to move to a completely decarbonised economy.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Well, this is absolutely staggering. The government promotes fracking, backed by only 12% of the public, effectively blocks onshore wind, backed by 79% of the public. New solar is down 94%. Home insulation is down 98%. Mr. Speaker, Parliament declared a climate emergency. Yet there is no evidence this government takes this seriously. We need a green industrial revolution to tackle climate change. And alone, Swansea Tidal Lagoon would have required 100,000 tonnes of steel, mainly from Port Talbot, but the government refused to back it. Can the right honourable gentleman tell us what the government has actually done since signing the Steel Charter to support our steel industry?
Mr. Speaker, if one looks at what is actually happening in the real world, rather than the ideological tracts which the honourable lady appears to spend her time reading, you will see, Mr. Speaker, that there are about 400,000 jobs already in low-carbon businesses and their supply chains throughout the United Kingdom, and scope for much more low-carbon growth to support up to 2 million jobs in the future. We now have received advice from the Independent Climate Change Committee about how to time and to legislate for our transition to a completely decarbonised economy, and we will be bringing forward our decisions later this year as to how and when we will be taking that action.
Well, the Independent Climate Change Committee has repeatedly criticised the government's approach to decarbonising our economy, but I know in the Right Honourable Gentleman's response there was not a single word on what support the government will provide the steel industry, and people from Redcar to Scunthorpe know that his empty rhetoric will not solve their catastrophe. Mr Speaker, climate change is an existential threat. To safeguard our future, we will need to mobilise all of our resources, just like we did when we rebuilt Britain after the Second World War. If we took the challenge seriously, we could create hundreds of thousands of jobs in low-carbon industries, reverse decades of decline in our deindustrialised areas and lead the world in renewable technologies. But the government is letting us down. They have recklessly run the clock down on Brexit. But I say to the Right Honourable Member, isn't it the truth that their failure is now running down the clock on our planet?